Will the community supply please come to order? This section of the community supply will now consider the estimates of the Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning. Does the Honourable Minister have an opening statement? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone on this little bit of a rainy afternoon here in Winnipeg, and I'm pleased to provide some opening remarks to the committee. In January of 2022, government established our new department, Education and Early Childhood Learning. As we know, that learning starts well before formal entry into school and continues right through to grade 12 and of course beyond. Just to start it off, I want to thank all the students, teachers, early childhood educators, school staff, school leaders, school administrators, parents, and caregivers in our province who have given so much and persevered through the challenges of this pandemic. Throughout the most significant event to impact our education system in 100 years, they have been dedicated to staying engaged and adapting to new ways of teaching and learning. Together with public health, we worked closely with the sector to keep schools and daycare centers safe and open to the greatest extent possible while pivoting to remote or virtual learning when needed. We also recognize how challenging and stressful the past couple of years have been and are working with the Canadian Mental Health Association to provide a continuum of mental health supports for students, teachers, and other staff. Throughout this time, we also continued to engage and consult with our partners and communities and heard about the importance of building upon strengths and continuous improvement. For early learning and childcare, this includes creating 716 spaces in new childcare centers and supporting 50 new home-based spaces this year alone, reducing fees by 50% this year for low-income and middle-class parents, expanding eligibility for subsidy, and supporting wage increases across the sector. We're currently building a more responsive, equitable, and high-quality care system through two interconnected Canada-Manitoba early learning and childcare agreements for almost $1.3 billion over the next 4 to 5 years. For our K-12 education system, our goal is to improve equity and accountability and provide flexibility to school and division leaders to help address their local needs. Our kindergarten to grade 12 education action plan, which was announced on April 20th, sets out the path for implementation of the K-12 Education Commission's recommendations and 10 imperatives for improvement. Mamatuisuin, the wonder we are born with, our Indigenous education policy framework, is the foundation for all of our collaboration, cooperation, truth and reconciliation efforts to that every student in Manitoba can reach their full potential and live a good life. Budget 2022 invests $1.7 billion in K-12 education, over $138 million more than last year. A funding review is underway in consultation with our partners that will see a new funding model implemented for the 2023-2024 school year, and that is equitable and provides the support students need to learn and succeed. We want students to have the opportunity to learn and grow in high quality learning environments and are minimizing transportation costs and overcrowding of existing schools in growing communities. By 2027, 22 new schools will be open for Manitoba's children and youth. We want an education and early learning system that is culturally diverse, affordable, and accessible, where all Manitoban children and students succeed, no matter where they live, their backgrounds, or their individual circumstances. Mr. Chair, I look forward to taking questions from the committee. Thank you.
We thank the Minister for those comments. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? The Honourable Member for Transcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank everybody gathered around this table today and for the Minister virtually for undergoing and involving himself in this process. It is greatly appreciated. We know that the estimates process is one where we can actually discover what some of the motivating pieces are and what is the philosophy, what is the driving principles behind the decisions that government has made regarding public education. I'd like to begin by, of course, thanking everybody in the system. The past 2.5 years, Mr. Chair, have been really challenging. When I visit schools, and I was just visiting schools during the break week, you really get a sense when you walk into the building of how tired people are, of how the pandemic has certainly impacted not only the everyday stuff, but it's also, not that teachers ever took it home before or anyone ever worked in the system never took it home, but boy, are they taking things home now. And it is, and what I mean by that is carrying the burden. I mean, obviously this is not a profession where you can just leave it at the door. It's something that sticks with you. And certainly everybody that has been in the system has been impacted. And what they're looking for is a plan. I will say, Mr. Chair, that when we talk about a plan that is trauma-informed, a plan that is pandemic-informed. And what we would like to see from the Department of Education is not only a trauma-informed plan, but also a pandemic-informed plan. So when the minister refers to looking back at the K-12 Commission, yes, there are some pieces in the Commission report that certainly, will have some really solid recommendations, but there's also has to be a realization now that the pandemic has changed a lot. That plan needs to have some pandemic-informed policies that will be brought forth by the Department of Education and by this government, because it's important. People in Manitoba, Mr. Chair, really care about the public education system. We saw that, Mr. Chair, with the Bill 64 fight. We saw that it's an important core government service, along with healthcare. Education is something that Manitobans hold very dear. And what they noticed was, and I find it rather interesting that now this government is all of a sudden going back to that K-12 report when Bill 64 clearly didn't indicate any real desire to do that. And we found out a little bit confounding, and certainly Manitobans did as well, because online, on the website, the Department of Ed website, we can see the 62 briefs that were presented and the hundreds of people that went to committee and felt that their voice wasn't heard. And what happened as a result of that process, Mr. Chair, is that people lost trust in this government when it came to public education, when it came to how it was going to proceed in the future. Because I will tell you, many Manitobans saw this as nothing more than just a power grab, and they were really concerned because, as I said in my earlier remarks, is that people really care about public education. It being a trust, it being something that is very much a stewardship piece that governments are handed, and that one that requires not only fiscal investment, but also an investment of a government that really wants to provide a public education service and system that is forward-looking, that is innovative, and that is some of the best in the world. And we have the people here to do that. We just have to have the will to implement many of these thoughts and pieces. Some of the pieces too that we would like to see going forward is that, and I know that we've talked about this a lot, but we're looking at now a new funding formula for public education. It absolutely needs to happen. I would agree with that. And hopefully, when we're done with this process, we can have a funding formula that is actually easy to understand, one that the public knows how it works. Because currently, right now, the funding formula is really difficult for most people in the general public trying to find exactly how it works. And so that part is something that certainly needs to happen, and we're looking forward to that and seeing how that looks. Of course, putting kids first in the process, right? Because we know that depending on where you live in the province, it can have a little bit of some variability as to the services that are received by students. I will also say, Mr. Chair, that there's also the financial reporting and accounting in Manitoba Education. We're looking forward to the latest frame reports and when they'll be presented by the minister. Frame is really important, Mr. Chair, because frame really indicates exactly where the funds are placed in public education. The other thing it really, and right on page 1, Mr. Chair, it says the percentage of the provincial support for public education. I will say, Mr. Chair, that in 2016, the percentage amount was 62.4% was supported by the provincial government. In the latest frame, that number is now down to 58.2%. That is actually quite stunning when you think of the impact of that much of a reduction of the provincial share. And what that does is that it places school divisions in the impossible position of having to make decisions on what services they can provide their students. And nothing can be more important than that very important service that the classroom teacher provides, along with the team that supports that classroom teacher. Right now, Mr. Chair, we have school divisions making choices where they have to cut teachers, have to cut student support, have to cut clinical services for kids. And this is a direct result of the province not living up to its commitment, its share, its absolute, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but it's more than just something that you do. This is like, it's a duty that you have to the citizens of Manitoba to ensure that these services are available. And by looking at what Frame has itemized in the past 5 years is a systematic decrease in the provincial support. So then school divisions are left with choices that are very difficult to make and shouldn't have to be made. And right now, when we know that we're being impacted by obviously a pandemic and other issues that impact public education, we need to see a province step up, Mr. Chair, when it comes to the funding of this core service, this core government service that has undergone, really, I would say, a tremendous amount of stress put on during the pandemic by introducing a bill that was roundly criticized and completely out of touch. And then all of a sudden, when it's politically expedient, it's gone. And that was something people really want, Mr. Chair, is a government that is committed to public education and one that puts students first in this particular piece. I will also say early childhood education certainly does belong in the Department of Education. As the minister said in his opening remarks, learning begins very early on, soon as conception, actually. And the service that we can provide for early childhood educators is something that's very important. What it does is it's economically also allows for fuller participation in an economy that people desire and people have seen occur in other parts of the country. We do know that Ontario has a junior kindergarten program, a full-time kindergarten program, one that dovetails very nicely with their early childhood education system, and one that hopefully will arrive here in Manitoba. So with those opening remarks, Mr. Chair, I look forward to having a constructive dialogue with the minister.
We thank the honourable member for those comments. Under Manitoba practice, debate of the minister's salary is the last item considered for a department in the Committee of Supply. Accordingly, we shall now defer consideration of line item 16.1 bracket A contained in resolution 16.1. At this time, we ask that the minister introduce the staff in attendance. The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and can you hear me with no problems? Give me a bit of a thumbs up.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good, thank you, sir. Okay, so just listing off individuals that are with me today for the estimates process. We have Deputy Minister Dana Rudy. We have Claire Bruel, who's our Executive Financial Officer. We have Michelle Stevens-Weens, who's our with us through our early learning and childcare sector of the department. We have Janet Tomey, who's our Assistant Deputy Minister for Student Achievement and Inclusion. We have Mona Pandy, who's our Assistant Deputy Minister for System Performance and Accountability. And we have Helen Robinson Satie, who's our Director for Indigenous Inclusion Directorate.
We thank the Honorable Minister for those introductions. According to our Rule 77, bracket 16, during the consideration of departmental estimates, questioning for each department shall proceed in a global manner, with questions put separately on all resolutions once the official opposition critic indicates that questions or questioning has concluded. The floor is now open for questions. The Honorable Member for Transcona.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. My questions will be global in nature and will be, is that correct? I have to state that, correct? Thank you.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. So let's begin. I do know that the minister in his opening remarks talked about reconciliation and education. We have had the TRC report released since 2015-16. Specifically, recommendations 62 to 64 were very, very specific. I would like to ask the minister with number 62, when it comes to curriculum development, at what stage of curriculum development are we at with regards to including Indigenous topics in our Manitoba curriculum?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll get used to the hand signals and all that type of stuff to let you know when it's time to speak or whatever else. So, you know what, I'd like to start off also by saying thank you to my friend and the MLA for Transcona. I know that him being an educator himself as well, and being in an administration role already, also in the early years, I know that we share that passion as well. Me being a former or still a teacher, I still like to consider myself as a teacher as well. So in regards to calls to action, the member knows, and I'm hoping the member knows, that on April 28th, our government launched Mama Tuwisuin, which is the wonder that we were born with, and basically that is our framework for Indigenous inclusion education, and which will actually continue to be the foundation as we move forward with our K-12 action plan, which is a roadmap for student success. Specifically when the member asks a question in regards to curriculum, I mean, we know that the calls to action is to definitely address some curriculum changes within the K-12 system. So holding true to our form and listening to many of our education partners throughout this great province of ours, we are moving forward on through development and, of course, reframing of curriculum. Manitoba Education and Early Childhood Learning is engaging with our Indigenous partners, and we have been over the past number of years in regards to when we formed government in 2016, and we're undertaking many new curriculum projects with a focus on Indigenous perspectives. This curriculum development work is intended to serve as that pathway to support truth and reconciliation in service of our Indigenous students and every student in Manitoba, no matter where they live, their cultural background, or of course their independent or their own circumstance. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the main reasons I asked that question is that, yes, you've been in government since 2016. The TRC report was released in 2016. And here we are, it's 2022. I think that is a long enough time frame, Mr. Chair, to have made taken some concrete steps and have some concrete examples. So I'm going to ask the minister, can he point to specific examples where curriculum has been implemented that reflects the recommendations from TRC 62?
The honourable minister.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the member from Transcona for the question. Whenever we start talking about Indigenous education, and of course now with Truth and Reconciliation, making sure that that we're addressing the needs, it is a little, you know what, I'm going to try to through these questions and answer periods that we're going to be, enjoying each other's company for quite some time over the next few days. So I'm going to try to keep the non-partisan or the partisan daggers to a minimum. And so I'm hoping that my friend and my friend from Transcona will try and do the same. I know for many years, and being an educator myself, working with within Sunrise School Division, I mean, there's many great things to celebrate through each and every school division that are doing various different things to help with truth and reconciliation, specifically for calls to action. I know that, and I'll refresh the members' memory that back quite a few years ago, it was called the AAA Committee. And I had the opportunity as a guidance counselor to learn from many of our elders across this great province of ours, specifically and go into communities, First Nations communities firsthand, and see a lot of the challenges, but also a lot of the successes that are happening not only in the communities, but also the neighboring school divisions that are working with the First Nation communities. And back, like I said, quite a few years ago now, I was part of that AAA committee, which stood for Aboriginal Academic Achievement Committee. And within Sunrise, they felt that they had an Aboriginal education committee for the whole school division. And I applauded a lot of individuals for stepping up and having those heartfelt consultations with community members and working with Indigenous students on trying to then, make sure that we're teaching culture, languages, and identity, and to build on those successes. And so when the calls to action came out, I mean, it was building on a lot of those successes, and I've got so much good news to share with the member moving forward on our K-12 action plan, and of course Mamatuwisuin, which is our framework for Indigenous inclusion and education moving forward. As I said earlier in my previous answer, that's the foundation to the 4 pillars that are in the action plan. I mentioned the AAA committee that we had back a few years ago. It is now called the Indigenous Academic Achievement Committee, and not committee, but it's Indigenous Academic Achievement. And each and every year, our government continues to put forward $10 million of funding. And with the various different programs and plans that we've got going moving forward, I mean, we want to make sure that basically we're making sure that we've got sustainable funding moving forward to make sure that we can connect the students with those cultural experiences for their identity, languages. And that being said, we're also working with various First Nations groups to talk about recruiting and training and retaining Indigenous teachers as well. So I'd like to thank the member for bringing the question up.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was I just want to remind the minister, that was my point. I mean, this came out in 2016. The department has an Indigenous Inclusion Director. I'm going to make the assumption, Mr. Chair, that the Indigenous Inclusion Director has had work to do. And we are now at 2022. My next question for the minister is based on what specifically has the director been doing, because I do know that the mandate really describes not just professional development being provided, but also leadership in this area. So I'd like to ask the minister, what specifically has the directorate been providing in the realm of professional development for current educators in Manitoba?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hopefully after about 9 or 10 days of question and answers with the member from Transcona, I'll get the signal correctly that I have to wave my hand when I'd like to speak, Mr. Chair. So you're gonna have to bear with me, and we're gonna hunker down here for a good maybe 10, 12 days. I mean, we've got 100 hours, so I'm game if the member from Transcona is. I'm hoping that the member from Transcona is not questioning the validity and the necessary role that the Indigenous Inclusion Directorate plays within our government, Mr. Chair, we know that Manitoba Education and Early Childhood Learning provides a variety of grants to support school divisions and Indigenous and education partner organizations that support multiple initiatives, which are intended to improve student and school readiness, student achievement, and of course, well-being and educational attainment for Indigenous students. The member decides to bring forward, and again, I'm hoping that he's not going down this road. So I'm going to temper this with more just answering his question, because the tone in his question was a little off, and that's not that member. I know that. That's coming from somewhere else, Mr. Chair. I know that this work on Mamatuwisawin started. And again, I can get the member a copy if he'd like. I mean, him as an educator, I know that last week for constituency week, I know as a good teacher himself, that's where he's coming from. That's where I'm coming from. I'm sure he would have taken the opportunity of constituency week to educate himself and hopefully some of his colleagues on some of these great initiatives that we've moved forward on. Mamatuwisawin and the action plan and anything in regards to Indigenous education, Mr. Chair, does not happen just overnight. The reason why we're doing a lot of these things now is because, Mr. Chair, it hadn't happened before. We're building on successes, Mr. Chair. And so for the member to assume or direct, or I don't even know what the word is right now, Mr. Chair, because I can't believe he would put certain things on the record of questioning whether people within the department are actually working with our Indigenous partners, with our Indigenous and our education partners across this province, Mr. Chair. I mean, again, Mamatuwisawin didn't happen just overnight. The work on Mamatuwisawin started probably late 2015, early 2016. And then as time had rolled along, this had many engagements with our Indigenous leaders and our knowledge keepers, our elders, our education partners, whether that being superintendents, administration, students, parents, everybody, Mr. Chair. So I'm hoping that the member wasn't meaning the question the way it came out, and maybe he can clarify or even apologize to the directorate for his for the way that question came out, Mr. Chair. But this is very important work. We're working together. We're making sure that the directorate works across all school divisions to advance specifically truth and reconciliation, Mr. Chair, because you can't have reconciliation without truth.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to remind the minister, I was asking for specific examples of leadership shown by the department in this area. What we've seen and what he mentioned during his last answer is that they've been listening to people in the past couple months. I was referring back to 2016 and leading up to this point. And I know the important work the director does. They've been doing that for years, even before 2016. I was questioning whether this government was listening to what the director was saying, Mr. Chair, because certainly judging by the actions and the lack of movement since 2016 up until 2021, there was very little evidence to indicate that. And people were getting frustrated because this government wasn't acting on the recommendations in TRC 62 to 64, very specific. And that's where the line of questioning was intended. We certainly have a number of people doing very important work, and we will continue to do that important work because that's what educators do. They'll continue to come to the table with their ideas. And what we need to see is a government that's willing to take that and move forward with it. Part of the other piece with the recommendations from 62 to 64 was that it was to provide denominational schools with funds so that students in denominational schools can learn about Indigenous spiritual beliefs, values, and systems. I would like to ask the minister at what stage of development is that plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, I'm going to get into some specifics as far as what has been happening within our directorate, and again, working with not only the K-12 department, with our education partners. Absolutely, and I'm appreciative that the member from Transcona finally puts it on the record that we have been listening to Manitobans, Mr. Chair. I think that is absolutely extraordinary, and I don't know, maybe the constituency week has done them quite well, and it's good. It's good to show progress on his part, but also on our part. It's not only collaborating to the extent that we've been doing, which is extensive collaborations all across this great province of ours with tens of thousands of Manitobans. And so I will give him a couple of the specific examples of what the directorate and what our government has been working towards. And then again, we will then pivot as well to Mamatuwisuin, which is again our framework. And he knows, because he's an educator, he knows what we're talking about when it comes to frameworks. These are sort of mandated things that the government does to bring forward ideas for school divisions, schools, educators, everybody involved, our education partners, to move forward with these ideas to then get those outcomes for student success. So, I mean, for one thing, I mean, we partnered with the Manitoba Aboriginal Language Strategy. We're working hard to make sure with our Indigenous friends and colleagues all across this great province that we start, making sure that we've got an Aboriginal languages strategy. And again, 17 years under the former government, nothing, not a zilch, right? So we're making sure we're moving forward. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Chair. It's a nonpartisan issue. This is absolutely something that should have been done years and years and years ago. And I'm proud of our government. I'm proud of our K-12, our education and early childhood learning department, and of course our directorate for working so hard on this, because it is the right thing to do. We're also working on it's called It's Our Time toolkit. And this is a partnership with the Assembly of First Nations. And basically what this does is increasing understanding of the First Nations history and culture among Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, producing relevant tools and resources. Again, Mr. Chair. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the next 10, 12 days of questions and answers coming from the member from Transcona. those are just a few examples of a lot of great things that are happening. We are also partnering. I know this is a tough word for the member from Transcona, but we're also partnering with the Treaty Commission. And we've made a commitment to make sure that our educators are committed to learning about treaties, Mr. Chair. This is absolutely, again, a nonpartisan issue. This is something that has to happen. Why does it have to happen? Because it's about time. Manitobans deserve it. Manitobans need to know the history, the languages. We need to make sure that our students in this great province of ours know the history. And again, when we talk about truth and reconciliation, Mr. Chair, we can't have reconciliation without the truth. And I've got many more examples of the great work that the department has done in regards to working towards that truth and reconciliation over the last few years, Mr. Chair. So I look forward to taking more time in the next few minutes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to remind the minister that I asked about specific examples regarding denominational schools and at what stage we're at where they are receiving instruction, exposure to Indigenous spiritual beliefs and ways of teaching and learning.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, specifically, the member did ask a question in regards to various different things that are happening. And I know that, again, this goes back to the member, potentially, hopefully, apprising himself of many of the good things that we have launched, not only recently, but in the last few years. And again, we look to our education partners. The member himself was an administrator. So and if he wants, I can give him some dates as well, because I don't know if he's just not reading some of either the news releases or the documents that we're putting out, but it's okay. It's fine. So on the 20th of April, we launched the action plan. And then the day after, which, by the way, the action plan was heavily applauded for the direction and making sure that students are at the center of that action plan. It's a living, breathing document, but I'll get into the action plan in a little bit. I know the member asked a specific question and he's looking for those answers. So the very next day after we launched the action plan, which then would have been the 21st of April, we launched the framework for learning. And again, superintendents, administration, within our school, within our education partners, they applauded the framework for learning, because all of Mamatuisuin and our Indigenous inclusion basic framework for moving forward. And keep in mind, I don't have to tell the member from Transcona this, because again, he's an educator and he knows all of this, but I'm going to pass along the information through him also to the many viewers and listeners that we have that are listening in on our information today, Mr. Chair. So there's been many initiatives. We talk about, Orange Shirt Day. I've already mentioned the framework. So within that framework, and again, he knows this, that framework is developed from the Department of Education. Then the school divisions and the school boards, they take that framework, they take it back to the frontline professionals, those teachers, and the teachers then take a look at what type of resources can they use to help deliver that framework to the students, and making sure that we are learning about and teaching about treaties, residential schools. I mean, we know that coming up shortly, September 30th, we have, Orange Shirt Day. We're going to be learning about all of these things, and we're going to continue to learn. I know the member didn't have all the answers and didn't know everything when he was a administrator, and nor did I. But that's why we need to collaborate and work with our partners, our Indigenous groups, our treaty commissioner, to make sure that those individuals teaching our kids, our students, our future, our most precious future resource, about all of this, and making sure that they've got the right direction. And then at the same time, we know that school boards, school divisions are then taking those and then making sure that the students are getting what they need in regards to awareness of so many important issues that not only happen here in Manitoba, Mr. Chair, but all across this incredible country of ours and around the world, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I need to be a little more specific in my questioning. I wasn't referring to anybody or any school system that's in the public realm. Very specifically in TRC 63, it states that there will be action and funding so that students in private denominational schools that are outside of the public school system will be provided resources so that they can provide education around Indigenous spiritual beliefs and Indigenous ways of living and growing. At what stage is the department at regarding this particular issue?
The honourable minister.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So specifically, since the member put the question so succinctly, so our Independent Schools Association, Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools, so just recently, and maybe even the member participated. I didn't think I saw his name on the attendees list when I brought greetings to it and stayed and listened to the keynote speaker. But the theme of their conference this year was Indigenous Education in Motion, moving forward together. And so the independent schools are absolutely finding that they want to do this as well. And so that's why that was their theme. They had many presentations in regards to treaties, into land acknowledgements, various other presenters, and I applaud absolutely everybody who was involved in basically showing that we are all moving towards truth and reconciliation, trying to do the calls to action, which again brings us forward to many of the great things that our department has done and is doing, and again working with our education partners, making sure that if in order to participate, the department, the directorate itself had basically worked with the Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools to help with the planning and identifying many of our elders and knowledge keepers. And hey, that just brings me to another great announcement by our government. But I'm hoping that the member takes my answer as an answer, and that's what I'm here today to do, Mr. Chair, over how many ever days that we're going to be going through the estimates process, is basically try to answer his questions to the best of my ability. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I just want to again put an exclamation mark on the fact that this is not done in 10 hours or 12 hours. And I'm talking about truth and reconciliation and moving forward on education and trying to help our Manitoba students, no matter, again, where they live, their cultural background, or their individual circumstance. Mr. Chair, this is an ever evolving system with education, and he knows that. He's a lifelong learner. So am I. So is all of Manitobans. So this is definitely something that I'm glad that our government has taken it on, and making sure that we've got those resources and supports put into place to make sure that we're enacting those calls to action. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Judging by that answer, I need to ask this question of the minister. Does the Department of Education track what independent schools are doing with regards to truth and reconciliation? Is there somewhere that the minister can point that where data is kept regarding this, where how action plans, like at what stage they're at? This is very important. The minister has said that. I certainly believe that as well. Advancing truth and reconciliation is important work that needs to be tracked, work that where we then can hold schools accountable as to where they're at and what stage are they at this. So I'll repeat it again, this specific question. Does the Department of Education track where independent and denominational schools are at when it comes to truth and reconciliation.
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member's asking, I'm not quite sure if somewhere along the line the Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools or something has wronged him or which line of questioning he's going. But this is the way I'm going to answer this, is the fact that the action plan basically says that we need to strengthen and based on again that the K-12 commission 75 recommendations within there is all about, and not all about, but some of the recommendations is definitely pointing towards data collection. And the member from Transcona knows specifically of how much of I can't even come up with a word, how much of a jumbled pot of soup the data collection systems in Manitoba have been over the years, Mr. Chair. And basically the commission and the recommendation says, you know what, you need to come up with some better data collections. And again, our government is committing to doing that. We're underway for a cross jurisdictional data collection system. But to go back to Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools and specifically talking about the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and I know that the member gets me off topic a little bit once in a while, but I'm trying to again take the high road in the answers that I take to his low road questions, but that's okay. So I know that the Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools is working towards those calls to action for truth and reconciliation. How do I know that? I know that the department's working closely with them. I know that the calls to action for truth and reconciliation, it doesn't have just, a specific education only tagline. This is for all Manitobans, calls to action. And I strongly feel that with the department, we're trying to better align the entire system. And again, work with our education partners. And whether that's Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools, Manitoba Parent Councils, Manitoba Association for Students, for School Superintendents, Manitoba Association for School Boards, Manitoba Teacher Society. I can keep going with all the partners, our parents, our guardians, of our students. But the ultimate goal, Mr. Chair, is the fact that we want to make sure that Manitoba students, again, no matter where they live, no matter what their cultural background is or their individual circumstance, is seeing success. And it's unfortunate, but yet fortunate. It's unfortunate that the previous government didn't take this seriously, Mr. Chair. And I'm glad to see that my friend, the MLA for Transcona, had decided to throw his hat in the ring because he knew that his party wasn't doing a great job. So he needed to run to make sure that we're moving things forward. And I look forward to working with him as we continue to move things forward that came from our action plan, the framework for learning, Mama Tuisuin, which again, 6 years in the making. It's here, it's today. We're getting many accolades from many, many thousands of Manitobans, unfortunately, except for the member from Transcona and his leader, where they wanted to be stuck in the past and not move forward with truth and reconciliation. So thanks, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to the member's next question.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So judging by that response, I would say no. The department doesn't track it, Mr. Chair. I would say, and I would respectfully ask that the minister and the department begin tracking that, because this is important. Important for kids, but also important for that whole piece around truth and reconciliation. It's important, and it's something that's the challenge of our times right now. And judging by that previous response, I certainly get the impression that the department doesn't know what's going on in independent and denominational schools when it comes to truth and reconciliation. And I would hope that through this line of questioning that the minister and the department endeavor to find out exactly what's going on with this very important topic in independent and denominational schools. So further along this track, I'd like to ask the minister, is there a specific budget line in place in the department that talks about the support they'll provide to independent and denominational schools to ensure that they get TRC 63 accomplished?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, going back to some of the announcements that we've recently made, and also all the great work that our government has done since 2016, since forming government in 2016, working with with the Department of Education and now early childhood learning, which is again a great move by Premier Stephenson by amalgamating those two departments, and again just emphasizing the fact that we are committed to the fact that early childhood learning is very important, especially when we get going into the K-12 system, and it's those synergies and ability to collaborate and have those conversations. I'm not sure if the member, I'm trying to see if I can, because I'm virtual, I'm trying to see if I can see, but I can't. If the member has the action plan in front of him, can't quite see that. But the fact is that within the action plan, and I know that the member, being an educator himself, would have apprised himself of all the information getting ready for estimates. But in fact, to answer his previous question, and unfortunately, he he put his own, I guess, answers on the record. But one of the recommendations from the K-12 Commission, Mr. Chair, is that we need to make sure that we're moving forward with achievement, truth and reconciliation calls to action, and we need to do a measurement of system-wide progress. And when we talk about system-wide progress, Mr. Chair, that's everybody involved in the education world. And I know that the member and his party, for some reason, wanted to have, I guess, disagreements or don't want to work with Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools. Mr. Chair, I'm a public school teacher. That's what I went to school for. That's what I was doing. That's what the member opposite was doing. But we know that some people do not choose that stream of education, but we're willing to work with them because that's what we do. We work with our education partners. Again, measure system-wide progress towards the achievement of the TRCC calls to action. And that is one of the Commission's recommendations. That's number 31. We're rocking it, Mr. Chair. We're moving forward on this stuff, and it's good. And some of the individuals that I think the member opposite probably raised his eyebrows when they came out applauding our government for a lot of the good things that are coming forward. I think that that was definitely one of those sad days for the member and his NDP supposed team over there, Mr. Chair. With that, also making sure that we, as I said, working with our education partners, our directorate is also making sure that they avail themselves to help with anybody that wants to help students in this great province of ours learn more and more as we move along. So we want to make sure that we partner with the various organizations, and we have a variety of grants that are specifically targeted in the 21-22 budget or for the school year, and then moving forward in the 2022, totaling of just over $14.5 million, which unfortunately the member opposite voted against. So I'm not quite sure. On one hand, Mr. Chair, the member talks about wanting to move forward and wants these educational opportunities for our students. But on the other hand, you know what, Mr. Chair, the actions aren't really matching the words. So I'll look forward to the member's next question. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In order to be, somewhat successful in ensuring that this occurs in independent and in denominational schools, is that, you can point to a specific budget line that says we dedicated this amount was used. We are in the process of ensuring that independent and denominational schools have the support that they need from a government that's listening, from a government that really wants to provide this type of support to the teachers in that system. So I'll ask the minister again, Mr. Chair, is there a budget line that he can point to that specifically targets independent and denominational schools so that they can move on this path of truth and reconciliation?
The honorable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the member's asking specifically, is there a line-by-line item that we, the government, the department, tells our independent schools what they have to spend their money on or not? And it almost sounds like the member is saying that we should be directly telling independent schools what they should or should not be spending their money on, which is interesting because much like our public school system, so just to put on the record, so we're just over the last 2 years, we're funding, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit probably shortly, But over the last 2 years, we've funded education in this great province of ours to the tune of about $327 million, which is about over a 17.2% increase. Now, what happens is that this funding is allocated due to within a formula, which, the member, mentioned this, and I mentioned this, the fact that we're in a funding review and all that type of wonderful stuff. So it gets allocated globally to the school divisions. So independent schools get money sent directly to them. And then, I know this is a shocker to the member, but then they decide what to do with that money. The calls to action, and I appreciate the member putting some of his words on the record because, because this is public information. And I think that a lot of our public would be very interested in the member's line of questioning. Because it's almost sounding like the member wants me, the Minister of Education, to now go tell individuals and school divisions and our partners of exactly what to do with the money that we're providing them. Mr. Chair, again, the calls to action are calls to action. What that means is these are things that absolutely everybody should be doing. And we, in the Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning, are making sure that we are helping with that. We are providing resources. We are providing a framework. We're providing yet an action plan to help with what? And I'll say it again. To help with what? With the student success of all Manitobans, Mr. Chair. And again, no matter where they live, their cultural background, or their individual circumstance, Mr. Chair. So specifically, is there a line item that says that independent schools have to spend a certain amount of money on truth and reconciliation, the calls to action? No, Mr. Chair. Why? Because we fund them and public education globally. And then it's up to school boards, school divisions, elected officials, Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools, to be able to then take that money and move forward on making sure that they're checking off the truth and reconciliation calls to action.
The honorable member for Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will say that in TRC 62 to 64, they are very specific in tasking the provincial governments in Canada of ensuring that funds and financial support are provided extra above and beyond what currently goes to independent and denominational schools to ensure that Indigenous spiritual beliefs, ways of living and being are taught in those schools within the province of Manitoba. It is the responsibility of the provincial government to ensure that there are funds for that, not their base grant, Mr. Chair, but a separate line item, because what that allows for, Mr. Chair, is for the department then to track and say, you know what, our independent schools are doing really well. Our denominational schools are using the money that we've allocated for this very important work. And look at what we're doing. An opportunity, Mr. Chair, to be a real leader in the country. And doesn't that make sense for Manitoba to be the real leader in the country regarding this? Absolutely. Treaty 1 territory, Mr. Chair. We're not talking about some little place here on the map of Canada. This is Manitoba, the homeland of the Métis Nation. And here is an opportunity that is outlined by the TRC. And when they task provincial governments to show leadership in this, they're talking about very specific pieces that can be tracked. What can be better, Mr. Chair, I ask, than having to say to Manitobans, look what we've done and how we supported independent and denominational schools in ensuring truth and reconciliation is occurring at those schools. A real opportunity here. And this line of questioning is meant to just to see, where we're at. Where are we at this point now in 2022? I mean, TRC report came out in 2015. You do allow for time for it to be implemented. But here we are in 2022, and the minister is struggling to answer, Mr. Chair, how they're specifically supporting independent and denominational schools in this important work. I would hope that we can find that out, and if not, have a plan in place so that the province can track it and also say, look at how we're doing this. So I want to ask the minister again then, when it comes to this specific part that I'm talking about, this very important part, Mr. Chair, what are the plans of the Department of Education to ensure that independent and denominational schools can carry on or begin, in some cases, this very important work?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, my friend from Transcona has asked another great question. I guess one of the things that I absolutely have to highlight for the member and the committee and whoever, all those fans that are listening and paying attention to this afternoon's estimates process, is the fact that the Manitoba Federation for Independent Schools have never had a themed.
Order. Hour being 5 p.m. Committee rise.